House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research. Today's meeting is taking part in a hybrid format, pursuant of the House Order on June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to Standing Orders 108.3, subset I, and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, September 26, 2022, we are beginning our study of citizen scientists. I would like to take a few moments to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those taking part by video conference, click on your microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I'd like to welcome our two guests today. And online we have Dr. Namer, and in person we have Dr. Corion. And we're going to start with opening statements from each witnesses. We're going to go in the room to start off. And Mr. Corion, I welcome you to take the floor for 5 minutes. And at the tail end of the 5 minutes, if you could attempt to look up, I will try to get your attention to speed it up if you're approaching that magical 5-minute mark. So with that, I'll turn the floor over to our first witness.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be back before you again today. Today, I've chosen a rather unique and perhaps even provocative angle to speak about science and citizen engagement. I'll briefly summarize the initiatives of my office, as well as the QFR in this area, focusing on our programs of audacity, dialogue, and engagement. And I'll be focusing to a great extent on the latter. One of the main triggers that has prompted us to develop our citizen science strategy is related to misinformation, disinformation, and fake news. I'm very concerned and have been very concerned for several years about this phenomenon. And it started well before COVID-19, well before the pandemic. But of course, with the pandemic, it was exacerbated. So how do we fight that? How do we fight disinformation and misinformation? It's not easy, as we all know, but it is absolutely essential for our democracies. Several studies indicate that an increase in scientific literacy, so training in science throughout life, is one of the most effective ways of combating disinformation and fake news. So it's urgent to increase and enhance scientific literacy in Canada. Now, we're working on it, but we must do much better. We should also offer all of our fellow citizens, people of all ages, better training on social networks and how they work, so that everyone can choose the most reliable sources, so that everyone understands how things work. It's not simply because it's the first one that pops up on Google that it's the best. So that's very important for people to have the ability to make that distinction. So how can citizen engagement and participatory science help to fight disinformation? What approach should we use? What approach do we use at our office? Well, Our program is referred to as engagement, engagement. It has existed for 3 years, and we invite our fellow citizens to put forth research ideas, proposals. We then meet with the citizens to discuss their proposals. We put them in touch with researchers who are interested in the topic or the subject of study. And then a very small team works together in order to refine the project. So to work out the details. It often takes 6 to 12 months to develop a project. Then the version is evaluated by a committee that includes citizens and experts. For people who are funded, they receive up to $50,000 over 2 years, and the researchers work alongside the citizens on the project. Now, it's not the results that counts the most here. It's about making our fellow citizens aware of scientific methodology. So that's extremely important. How do we build science? How do we develop our arguments? How do we deal with setbacks, with uncertainties? All of that increases a person's scientific literacy and enables them to fight misinformation and fake news. A better understanding of the scientific approach is really one of the main objectives of the engagement program. Participants in our program are always very proud of their projects. They become good spokespersons, good quality spokespersons for explaining science, research, and scientific data in their living environment, in their communities, and often in the media as well, and even with their members of parliament. So these small steps that enable us to fight misinformation and the lack of scientific literacy in Quebec, and we hope that we'll be in a position to ensure that in the years to come, this type of program that we've developed will spread Canada-wide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your testimony today. Now we will go online and hear from Dr. Namer. Dr. Namer? Dr. Namer, I think you're muted. There you go.
Yes, sorry, I'm muting. Alors, bonjour à tous, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to discuss with you this important subject today. As a society, we find ourselves renegotiating many of our systems and institutions today affected by the trials of the past 3 years. Going forward, we need to consider citizen science as an integral part of our strategies for empowering individuals and communities, for building trust in our institutions, and for sustaining our democracy. Citizen science, which is also called participatory research, and is a collaborative approach to research between public volunteers and professionals, operates in a variety of disciplines, with the common value being that it opens up the scientific enterprise to people beyond the professional communities. In the past 10 years alone, citizen science has helped to make advancement in several fields, including space, the environment, agriculture, and health. A few examples where it's contributed is the discovery of 5 new exoplanets, achieving the first crowdsourced redesign of a protein widely used in synthetic chemistry, helping to design ways to prevent the COVID virus from entering cells, and leading to the discovery of entirely new aspects of the Earth's magnetic field. Il est clair que la recherche participative peut être extrêmement utile à la science.
It's clear that this research will be very important. It can help us to support multidisciplinary approaches and to promote objectives, scientific objectives, by encouraging the participation of the public. But it can also be extremely helpful for citizens and for society in general. By opening up science to non-professionals, we can focus on the future and help people to better understand data that is used in order to develop public policy. We can also provide people the tools that they need and to make informed decisions with respect to their lives and their communities.
And jurisdictions are adopting and supporting citizen science initiatives, and I salute the work that is being carried out in Quebec by my colleague Rémi Quirion. Both the US and the European Union currently fund major projects. In fact, since 2017, the US has had a Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science Act, which aims to promote innovation through open and voluntary scientific collaboration. Australia too has implemented a Citizen Science Association. Germany has created a federally funded and centralized platform to promote it. The Netherlands implemented a process to facilitate the input of citizens and scientists in the Dutch research agenda, and Belgium has done something similar. These are all very promising initiatives that are helping to connect people around the world to their communities, environment, and the science and innovation enterprise. Here at home, we have some citizen science initiatives, both within and outside of the federal government, and they are doing great things. Le portail fédéral Sciences Citoyennes.
The Federal Citizen Science Portal currently lists 55 projects across the country, from Abeille Citoyenne, which gathers data on pollinator species in Quebec's agricultural regions, to the online game called Colony Bee, in which players grow and identify diverse clusters of bacteria that contribute to research on the human microbiome. Within the federal government, the Public Health Agency is engaging people through Flu Watchers, an initiative in which volunteers help track COVID-19 and influenza in Canada. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is supporting Canada's first Indigenous-led living lab, which brings together farmers, Indigenous people, and scientists to define exactly what the future of healthy and sustainable farm ecosystems can look like.
At Health Canada are leading a multidisciplinary interdepartmental initiative reflected in Canada's 5th National Action Plan on Open Government. The aim is to promote citizen science through a framework that supports capacity building as well as the required governance and infrastructure. Le Canada aurait intérêt à introduire la science citoyenne.
Canada would be well served to introduce citizen science early in our education system. It's an effective way to raise scientific awareness and training in an inclusive manner, as well as to encourage greater participation. The approach would also be in keeping with the 2019 G7 Science Advisors recommendation that countries rethink their scientific education and equip students to be able to undertake either participatory or professional research later on.
Our time allotment, but I appreciate what you've shared so far, and we'll have an opportunity to expand on that a little bit once we get into the questions from our members. So first off, we have our 6-minute round, and to start off from the Conservatives, we have MP Lobb. Mr. Lobb, you have the floor.
Thanks very much. My first question would be to Mr. Quirion, and what is the potential in your mind or in your vision for citizen scientists?
I think there is a lot of opportunities there. We're lucky, I'll say, in Canada, in Quebec in my case. There is a lot of interest in science, how science is built from our citizens. So compared to some other country, a lot of interest. So it's a matter of connecting, making connection with them, academician in university and college, in the private sector, linking with citizens, asking them what they think. Often they have great suggestion, great idea. We get a lot of projects. Every time we have a competition, project in environment, in health, in arts, in culture, and they say, for example, well, a lot of blue algae in the lake, they're not used to see that. Why is that? Can we work with scientists on that? So then citizen science, they do the project like that. In Montreal, women on the street, itinérants, les itinérantes, they started a project, a research project to try to help these women so that they could get back to a kind of a bit more of a normal life. So I think there is a lot of opportunities. The key for me is to treat them as equal. So it's not someone like me with a PhD above them and they work, in a sense, for us. No, they are really equal co-design of the project, very, very critical.
So, again, on the funding side, and if I missed that in your statement, I apologize, but from a funding standpoint across Canada, what would you say the amount of investment is in these types of projects?
I don't know for the whole of Canada. It's still small. It's still small. And when we started to think about the program, one of the first things we said, we need to give some of money support that is enough so that they can do the project with the scientists, collaboration scientists, but also often many of them don't have much revenue. So we need also to support them in that, because sometimes they will take a few days off or they'll be partner in a clinical study. So we have to support them. In Quebec, at the moment, it's few millions, about $3 million a year that we spend on that from the Fonds de Recherche du Québec. On the national scene, I don't know. Maybe my colleague Mona will know more than 50, but it's still small. As Mona said, I think in the US, in the UK, there's more of a longer tradition, I'll say, of citizen science. If there's one thing we need to keep in mind and learn from the pandemic, is that citizen can be part of helping the whole community.
I'm sure one of the things that's a frustration from a citizen scientist, and I would think back to my area, which is a rural area. There are a lot of naturalists and farmers and so forth that have lived on the farm their entire life, or they've been near a green area, and they may have a very sharp knowledge of different things, whether it's rain patterns, weather patterns, trees, crops, frosts, whatever it is. Maybe a lot sharper than some of the university students or researchers, but their knowledge isn't peer reviewed. And so is this what you're saying, is that you can take the knowledge of a group of farmers in a region, couple them with somebody, and be able to have a peer reviewed document? Is that the idea?
Eventually, so basically the key things, the first time we launched the call, we did that too quickly. So they submitted proposal, we linked them with scientists, and then they started the project. Now what we do is that they submit the project, and for about 6 months, sometime a year, they interact with the scientific community to express their knowledge, to explain their knowledge to the academic community. They build the program together, they work together. If there is a publication in the end, both of them are part of it. It's not just the scientists. So you give them reward in a sense, and they are very proud. I must say that every time that we support team like that, the scientific community, of course, are happy about it, but I'm more impressed by the citizen that say, I had an idea, I had some knowledge, they listened to me, now we work together, and they continue. After the end of the project, they continue to work together. So that's something we need to nurture in the future.
Yeah, I can think back a long time ago in the field of crop farming and no-till drilling using certain types of, like, I guess it'd be non-traditional farming practices 40 years ago. And it was a group of farmers not far from where I grew up that worked with the University of Guelph and kind of perfected no-till drilling for crops in southwestern Ontario, I would say. So the other thing is, I would say, is I could see where there could be potential for this in areas along our Great Lakes and our other water courses throughout the country. My neighbor, for example, he goes out every day and he represents the Lake Huron Coastal Conservation Area, and he takes the temperature of the lake, and then he reports that back, and they put that in, and they know roughly where he is, and they can monitor it up. So I can see how there will be tremendous advantages as they accumulate these data points. Is this something you could see would benefit across the country?
Yes, for sure. And I'm coming from a very small village also in the Lac Mégantic area, like Drolet. And it's not me. I was not involved in any of the proposal or pre-review, whatever, but like Drolet got an engagement grant. Citizen proposed in terms of the lake, the quality of the water on the lake, and now there's about 25 of them in a small village. working on that to take sample like that of the water, temperature of the water, all that every day. So it's extremely useful for the Ministry of
Thank you very
Environment, for
much.
example, to have that.
We're out of time, but thank you for those rounds of questions and answers. Moving on to the Liberals, we have MP Collins. You have the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back to our witnesses. I would like to start with Dr. Namer. Dr. Namer, your opening sentence caught my attention as it relates to your comments around citizen science and sustaining our democracy. And we've heard a lot of information in past studies, and actually Dr. Carrion mentioned disinformation and misinformation in his opening as well. I should reference that. And we heard a lot of information from past witnesses and other studies about disinformation and information floating through, of course, social media. Where else would we find that? And in the attempt to undermine not just science, but public health initiatives and information that has helped us get through the pandemic. And so my question to you, Dr. Namer, is I should say that as a member of the Board of Health before I arrived here on my municipal council, I experienced those comments and the pushback to public health professionals who are trying to assist, whether it was the use of masks, whether it was the social distancing, or even the benefits of getting the vaccine. We just see this constant trend since the beginning of the pandemic to try to undermine the efforts of science that have helped us get through the pandemic for scientific initiatives that have helped over the last 30 or 40 years to get us to where we are today. So with that preamble, I want you to maybe further elaborate on how citizen science helps us with sustaining our democracy. I think those were your comments in your first sentence.
Thank you very much for this question. And, citizens make decisions every day, and that, of course, affects our institutions and our democracy. And it's very important that they be able to judge the integrity of the information, the validity of the information, the quality of the information, the quality of the evidence. And all of these, which we can also put into the sentence of the scientific method, which is going in a rigorous analytical manner about proving or disproving your hypothesis. This, in many ways, is what citizen science also teaches you, because it's not only about gathering information and gathering the data, but you have to do it in a way that's consistent. You have to do it in a way that is going to end up being representative. If you generalize conclusions, you have to be sure that this is actually reflective of everything. So it's all these things that you learn to question that will help you tell something that is true information or disinformation, because you're going to be able to question the integrity and the source and the method by which the information is being disseminated and has been gathered.
Thanks, Dr. Namer. Dr. Carrion, can I ask you the same question, please, along the same lines?
Yeah, maybe I could add a little bit, and I talk about scientific literacy. I think certainly one way is to increase scientific literacy all across Canada. So, and I think with the pandemic, we saw that. It's very important. It's very important to do that from day one, almost in primary school. That to young kids, they are very curious. They want to learn things. So to explain a bit, of course, with simple word, what is science, the fun of science, not only that's hard, tough, difficult, but it's fun to do science. Then you keep doing that with the teenager, because at that point it's a bit more challenging with some of them. There's some that believe it, and that have fun in science, or they'll find it hard. So finding ways to interest them in science, and then throughout life. And I think it's the duty of government, local, provincial, and national, to offer opportunity for to increase scientific literacy here in Canada, and I would hope all over the world. So it's key to democracy, I think.
Thank you for that answer. My next question would be for Dr. Namer. Dr. Namer, I think you referenced some other examples internationally of funding models and strategies that have been used by different levels of government around citizen science. And I'm accustomed to dealing with, if I use my hometown as an example, in Hamilton, dealing with the Hamilton Naturalist Club, who've been around for over 100 years. And I know that they're always competing for a patchwork of government grants, of trusts that might make monies available for citizen science initiatives. And so it seems like we don't have maybe as much of a formal process as those that you referenced in your opening statement. Can you compare and contrast the funding models then that we have here in Canada and how we're supporting citizen science versus those that you've listed both in the US and in Europe?
Oh, you're on mute still. Look, and you got 42 seconds right now.
Sorry. I'm saying that we're still at an embryonic stage in terms of supporting citizen science. We've historically supported investigator-initiated research in universities, in government, of course, departments, and in private sector. We're starting to include a community-based research and community-led research. So I think that we have to put in place the platforms that we need to do this matchmaking. We need to properly fund the human resources that go with this. I mean, there are field trips, there is computing, there's data analysis, there's the time of the professionals who are engaged with the communities and with the citizens and the population in general. So I think that we need to go at it in a more systematic manner than what we've done so far. It can be encouraged as part of many of the targeted research that we do, or just crowdsourcing, trying to solve a problem and seeing where the best ideas come from and opening it up as well to citizens, people who are not in formal settings, but who are collaborating or are prepared to collaborate with more formal training, if you want.
Thank you so much for the testimony and the questions from Mr. Collins. Now we're moving on to the block, and I'll cede the floor to MP Blanchette.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Permettez-moi de saluer les témoins.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today, the Chief Science Advisor of Canada and of Quebec. Thank you for being in the room today, sir. My questions, for starters, will be for Mr. Quirion. It's important to increase the knowledge of science among the general public. How can the things like the Réseau Francophone, the Francophone network that you piloted, will help? And I'd like to congratulate you in passing on that to work, but how can initiatives like that contribute to achieving this important objective, which is making people more literate, focusing on citizen science? Microphone, please. The objective is to increase the capacity worldwide, among Francophones, for example, and we need to be in contact with boards, with people in charge of making decisions, scientific advisory boards. And so that will create a better link between elected officials and the scientific community. And that will indirectly facilitate everything that is connected with citizen science, with the participatory science as well. Because as elected officials, you will hear more about it. You will hear more about these scientific advisory boards and scientific advice, and you will hear from people in your ridings. They will say, well, we've heard about citizen science. What could we work together? And so in Quebec, yes, but what we'd also like to see is for this to spread internationally if we think about issues that are as crucial as climate change and to the pandemic as well, which was also a global phenomenon. Well, thank you, Mr. Quirion. How can the development of this at the international world help? Now, we saw in the fall of 2022 that many promising initiatives, including the Second World Week of Francophone Science, took place. It led to the signing of a manifesto for scientific diplomacy among Francophone countries. And we know that Quebec and Canada participated. in the signing of this manifesto. What can you tell us about that and about the benefits that it will represent? Answer. Well, I think that we're very used to hearing talk about diplomacy, but more often from a more political or cultural perspective. But science doesn't have any borders. We work together across the world. Palestinians work alongside Israelis in Geneva on the particle accelerator, etc. So what we're trying to do is use science and researchers to open doors across the world. In the Francophone world, scientific diplomacy is very important. It's part of the vocabulary. It's a part of what the leaders in Quebec can talk about today, and I'm very proud of that. Well, thank you. Now, with respect to this vocabulary, I'm looking for vocabulary on this subject in the federal government, but it's not very present. It's almost absent completely. So I'd like to know, as head of science in Quebec, do you see enough collaboration internationally among Francophones? Well, yes, we do. We do work together. When we launched the International Francophone Network, it was in partnership with Mona's team. We have a forum. It's a little bit different, but it's on science in French in Quebec. That was in April, and Mona's team was involved. So I think we need to keep pushing so that we can continue to promote science in French. Well, you can count on me to continue to push from this side. Is the federal government, or could the federal government do more on these issues? There's collaboration, but what are your expectations from them? Well, clearly we could do more, create more links with the 3 granting councils, for example, at the federal level, linked with the councils in Quebec. We can always do more. And we can also do it from a perspective, from an international perspective. That's very important. Now, my next questions are for Ms. Niemer. Dr. Quirion said that you were present last October when the network was, the International Francophone Network was created. However, based on the research that I looked at, no communications came out from your organization as the Chief Science Advisor of Canada, nor was there anything from the federal departments. What explains the absence of communications from your organization following the signing of the manifesto on Francophone science?
Bien, j'aimerais commencer.
Well, I'd like to start by saying that my job is very different from my colleague's job in Quebec, because in addition to advising the government, he is in charge of the granting councils in the province. So he has a say over science, research, and expenditures associated with that I don't have. My role is as one of an advisory role as science advisor. I prepared my first annual report, or my last annual report, rather. I emphasized the importance of scientific diplomacy. I advocated for it among Francophone countries. Canada has a golden opportunity by aligning itself with Quebec and to work abroad on these issues. Of course, we have departments that are responsible for various aspects of our international relations. But I think that increasingly we realize that we are a very strong country, scientifically speaking, that we need to use science in our international relations, and everywhere that science can improve the lives of people.
And we're moving on to the 6-minute round, MP Cannings.
Well, thank you, and thank you both witnesses for being here today. I just, as a matter of full disclosure, this study was my idea, and I'm glad we're doing it. I think it's very important, and it's good to hear some of the initial discussions. And my full disclosure is that I used to work in the citizen science world before becoming an MP. At least that was part of my world, both as a professional scientist and as a citizen scientist. So this is something that's very dear to my heart. And I just wanted to bring up some things that Mr. Lobb said, that there are citizens out there that are on the land every day, whether they're farmers or fishers or hunters or birders, that are experts in their own right. You know, you can think of citizen science as, you know, ordinary citizens doing things for real scientists that just need a lot of bodies across the country, and that's one aspect of it. But in many cases, the people gathering this data, certainly I come from the bird biology world, most of the keen birders out there know a lot more about birds than bird biologists. So it's really valuable to engage them. And I just wanted to perhaps direct a question to Dr. Niemer about the work that some of these groups do, whether they're NGOs or people participating directly in federal government programs. If she can maybe tell us something about the scope of these things. That one of the real values of citizen science is that it can happen over decades and decades. We have citizen science programs that have been going on since the year 1900. They take place all across the continent. That sort of data is impossible to gather from just a single lab. So perhaps Dr. Niemer, if maybe you can tell us expand on some of the programs that the federal government itself uses to gather important data for its work, whether it's in environment or weather and climate, things that are important to Canadians that really rely on citizen science.
Thank you for the question. And Mr. Chair, if you would allow me to express my admiration to MP Koenig for the extraordinary work that he's done to promote citizen science. I think we're reaping the benefit of what he started, and we need to amplify it. A number of examples that I listed include a lot of work in terms of the biodiversity, whether it's the birds, whether it's the bees, the lakes as well. In terms of health, there are so maybe I'll step back for a sec and say that when we talk about citizen science, very often we think about data gathering, and data gathering is absolutely part of it and is essential and really enhances the repertoire of the information that we have, especially in a country like ours that is so immense, and there's just like no way we could have information about every corner of the country. But there is other examples as well, which is doesn't really depend on data gathering, but actually sort of playing with the data to provide solutions or to create, like I said, structures for proteins. And why this is important, because it now allows to develop a drug, a medicine for certain diseases. So I think that we do have to appreciate people's imagination and how astute they can be in terms of using the data for things that others have not thought about. And I just want to give you an example, if I may. During the pandemic, one of my youth council members, she started a project to basically gather information about PPE littering in nature along the coast. And she developed an app that's called Marine Debris Tracker. Got many other people involved with this. Actually, it's now funded by National Geographic. So we can have programs that are funded by our own governments, but we can also have important programs that link internationally and that are funded by international organizations.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Quirion, I'm really interested in the program that you alluded to, where people can actually suggest scientific efforts and become involved with scientists and develop that, get funding. You mentioned, I think, monitoring blue-green algae in lakes. Are there other examples of that? And perhaps just let you expand on those.
Yeah, let's just say first, congratulate you, and it is, I will use you as a poster boy. We'll say that citizen scientists can become MPs, so that's quite amazing. Yes, there is many other examples. We could send you more information on that. One is a woman on the street in Montreal that talk about itinérance and how can we probably work together with the help of scientists so that they get better, they can get back to work, they can get a housing somewhere and all that. So that's a great program, and the woman in charge, she's just amazing. She's fabulous. So there's many examples like that.
Right. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to move on to our 5-minute rounds. And up for the Conservatives is MP Mazur.
Dr. Namer, my questions are for you today. Your mandate includes, and I quote, advising on ways to ensure that scientific knowledge is considered in public policy decisions and that the government science is fully available to the public, end quote. Has the government asked you to produce any scientific reports or advice on the impact that reducing fertilizer emissions by 30% would have on Canada's food production?
The short answer is no, not on that particular topic.
So, sorry, I didn't get that answer. No? Great, okay.
The answer
Move on.
is no
Okay.
on this particular topic.
Okay, thank you. Have you personally seen any scientific reports or studies to suggest that the government's 30% fertilizer emissions target can be met without decreasing food production?
I can tell you that if we want to go seriously about our targets, we're going to need to consider actions in many different sectors, including agriculture, including transportation, including housing. But I think that in terms of the agriculture and agri-food, there are huge opportunities for the country. I think that we need to change our behaviors in terms of food wastage. But there are great areas of potential innovation in terms of agriculture, of precision agriculture, that we can reap all the benefit of the genomic revolutions, of even traditional knowledge that we talked about a lot. We know how we integrated with other things and determine how we can decrease a lot of the fertilizers that we're using, enhancing the soils in natural manners. I think that science can support us in incredible ways in this.
So you have not personally seen any scientific reports or studies to suggest that the government's 30% fertilizer emissions target can be met without decreasing fertilizer or food production, correct? You haven't seen any science on that. You have not seen any science on that.
Well, I haven't seen any report on this.
That's good. Thank you. Can you please share with this committee what specific reports or activities we should expect from your office this year?
This year we're going to be updating the guidelines for science advice and evidence. We should be putting out an interim report on the science for impact assessment.
Chair, could I just raise a point of order?
And we're going to be looking more carefully.
Yes, I'm not certain what the relevance is in terms of citizen science. So certainly these are scientific questions, but today's topic of discussion is citizen science. So I would just ask that we refocus our energies on what's in front of us and why we invited the witnesses to committee today.
I would view the questioning in order because we are dealing with science and a science-related topic. So I would not rule that point of order in order. So, Mr. Mazur, I'll let you continue. You have a minute, 29 seconds.
Okay, excellent. Can you please just share what you're going to be, your activities and the reports you're going to produce this year then, please, Doctor?
We're going to put out a report on managing the long COVID, post-COVID condition.
I have more questions here, so if you could just please table those, that would be great.
Great. We can do that.
Okay. What are the consequences if the government fails to engage with citizens when developing policies that impact them?
Engaging with, first of all, the government represents the people, and the people and the governments need to continue to work together towards bettering the country.
What are the consequences of that, though, if they don't?
Well, if they don't, there is a loss of trust, and the loss of trust in institution and in government can be quite costly, and can erase a lot of the benefits that otherwise can accrue from all the efforts that both the government and many parts of the public actually work towards.
Okay. And since you were appointed to the role of Chief Science Advisor, have you ever witnessed a political decision that goes against your scientific advice?
I have provided advice on many things, but not on all things. So it's a difficult answer really to give you, but I can tell you in the cases where I have provided advice, I have felt that my advice was taken into consideration.
Thank you so much, Dr. Namer and MP Mazur. Now on to our newly elected MP Sosa.
Thank you very much, and thank you both for providing your presentations and information relative to this issue. And I'm wondering what fields of research where we could actually use more support from citizen scientists where they're not necessarily contributing today. In other words, are there areas that we could embellish or we could nurture even better than what's being done in certain aspects? And again, a follow-up to that then would be, how would you get them involved as a result?
Could start, and then Mona could continue.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to share my time with MP Diab as well. Thank you.
seconds left.
Okay, so it's certainly everything related to sustainable development. It's a huge topic. A lot of interest from citizens, at least the experience we have in Quebec, related to climate change, but this is much larger than that. Circular economy, for example. We could use quite a bit more of input from the public in cities, in the region, all that. So certainly it's an area where we could use the knowledge, but also the brain of our citizen to help scientists reach their objective, and also government reach their objective in terms of circular economy, for example. And maybe Mona could add to that.
Yeah, Mona, how would you invite them, or how would you engage them to be part of it?
I agree that the environmental area is very ripe for this. I think biodiversity in particular, we can double our efforts there. But we can as well think about other areas like, for example, monitoring pollution and even monitoring how well we're doing in terms of our actions. So citizens could equip their cars or their homes with detectors that tell you how much pollution there is in the air. I mean, just like some examples there, coastal areas. But I just want to go back to agriculture, because I think that agriculture is a great area where there has been a lot of science and knowledge that's been gathered. And I think that we can do a lot more there. And it would have ripple effects in terms of encouraging young people to get interested in agriculture and agri-food, but also in terms of combining all these years of tradition and knowledge with modern scientific tools and possibilities.
Over to MP.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you very much to my colleague, MP Souza. So both our witnesses, welcome back. Bienvenue encore une fois chez nous dans nos comités. C'est toujours
Welcome back to our committee. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
to get really your knowledge and expertise in these areas. Was listening intently, and you know, for me, when I first heard the term, that was brought up by Mr. Cannings, to be honest, citizen scientist, wasn't really sure what it meant. So I'm glad that we're here, and I'm glad of the information that you gave us, Monsieur Curion, as to so it's a programme d'engagement, et vous avez parlé beaucoup des comment battu des informations et avec les réseaux pour que les citoyennes et les chercheurs.
So for citizens and researchers can work together. So for us, that's very important.
Question that I have, and I know you've talked about that, so I'll be brief. How can we get more Canadians involved in science in their communities? And what role can youth play in developing citizen science? What can you share with us on this committee that we can work towards?
20 seconds each, please. 40 in total.
Scientific literacy, increasing scientific literacy will be a way to increase participation of citizens in research, in science. Certainly it's one way. The other way, to have more support, more program, more funding for citizen science. And I prefer to call it often participatory science, maybe a bit easier to understand than citizen science.
Dr. Namer, quickly.
I would say that as we encourage participation, we really need to be cognizant of vulnerable populations and those who are excluded generally. And this is why starting very early on and in collaborations with schools and educations allows us to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind. Science is for everyone, and we need to give access to citizen science to everyone in the country as well.
Thank you so much. Now on to the 2.5-minute round. We'll go to the block with MP Bouchat.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je vais poursuivre Madame Neymer sur la lancée tout à l'heure concernant.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to continue along the lines of the manifesto that was signed last October. As you know, that Canada also signed it, and it had a number of teams, and one of them was with respect to Francophone science. I'd like to know what your organization is doing. Have you looked at it? Is there an action place to put some guidelines and identifiers around that? Answer. I'm happy to answer your question, because among the important things we're working on in my office is a plan for open science. This is very important, both in French and in English, but also we're exploring, in cooperation with partners in Quebec and France, the possibility of developing some systems for the translation of all documents into French, not just from French to English, but also into French, so that we can, in fact, enable all Francophones across the world to read scientific publications in the language of their choice. So, yes, these are modern tools, and they will enable us to do some things that are more complex. Question. Well, I'm monitoring that very carefully. Please share any information you have on that with us. Now, you talked about participatory science, about mobilization, etc. Now, you know that during studies that this committee has done, we've talked about the application of science in French. What we've noticed is that there is inequality of access among for Francophones, especially Francophones in Quebec. There is less access, less influence. And so I'd like to know, Dr. Niemer, how can we think about having a concrete impact on people through science expressed in one language that doesn't isn't understood by a larger portion of the population, because French in science is virtually absent there. How can we mobilize people in communities if the community doesn't have access to information in its language? Francophones in science doesn't have access to Francophone documents in French, rather.
The witnesses can please submit a written response to the question from MP Blanchette. Now on to the NDP Member of Parliament, MP Cannings, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, and I'd like to also direct my question to Dr. Niemer about, Dr. Niemer, you mentioned Indigenous participation in some of these programs, and I mentioned the fact that citizen science, one of the advantages is we can gather long-term data sets. Well, obviously the longest-term data set we have is that traditional knowledge that Indigenous peoples hold under a different paradigm than Western science, perhaps. But I'm just wondering if you could perhaps comment in a couple of minutes how the federal government integrates Indigenous knowledge with science to make sure we capture that extraordinarily important knowledge that they hold.
Thank you very much for this question, which is very important indeed. And we're working in my office to develop, if you want, best practices to see how we can do it. Of course, knowledge gathered by Indigenous communities belongs to the Indigenous communities. They're the holder of the information, and we need to engage, build trust to start off with, and really develop ways by which it's agreeable to the communities to be sharing the knowledge, and under which terms. But I must say that weaving together the Indigenous knowledge and the knowledge gathered from Western science is extremely important if we want to provide proper evidence on which to build policies in many areas. So I would say it's work in progress. We have a researcher in residence in my group, comes from the Indigenous communities. Within the Government of Canada, we have helped develop what we call the iSTEM cluster, so Indigenous in STEM. And we're working with our Indigenous scientists really to be guided and see how we can get at a stage where we can have both knowledge systems informing our policies.
Thank you so much for our witnesses. Thank you for being here today. And now we will be suspending briefly before moving to our next item of business. Colleagues, we are now pleased to welcome the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, the Honourable MPA Champagne. The Minister will be speaking and answering questions on two of our studies, research and science publications in French and the international moonshot programs. After the Minister's opening statement, we will follow the usual order of questioning, and members are welcome to ask questions in relation to either study or both. Before we begin, I'm going to also allow the Minister to introduce his other guests and senior officials with him. And with that, Minister, I will turn the floor over to you.
Chair, you're very kind, and sorry for my voice. I still have a bit of I've been talking a lot these days. Why don't we start with introduction? Ted, you want to introduce you? It's probably easier if we go this way, just to the group and my colleagues.
Okay, je suis Ted Hewitt, président du SRSR.
Ted Hewitt, President of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council.
Francis Bilodeau, je suis sous-ministre associé au département.
Francis Bilodeau, Associate Deputy Minister of the Department.
Ian Stewart, National Research Council.
Catherine McLeod, Executive Vice President, CHR.
Thank you, Chair.
Monsieur le Président, point d'information avant de commencer.
Just a point of order, point of information, if I may. So we're starting to have people around the table. We're starting a little bit late, but I'd like to ensure that we're not going to lose any time, that we could, with the agreement of the Minister, have a few additional minutes at the end so that everyone can get their questions in.
Well, Chet, I did talk to the Minister, and we're going to have a full hour once he starts, so there will be no rounds missed. But I'll turn the floor back over to Mr. Champagne for the introduction, or for his introduction remarks.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Chair. Je veux assurer mes collègues, on va être là.
I'd like to ensure my colleagues that we will be here because this is one of the most important committees of the House. And I would like to say that I spoke to a scientist recently who said that science of today is the economy of tomorrow.
I could not think of a committee which has more important work to do, and I want to thank all of you. Je vous remercie tous et chacun de servir.
So I'd like to thank all of you for serving on this committee. So I'm happy to make my first appearance before this, as I said, essential committee, given the importance of science and research to Canada's future and prosperity. As a member of a government that values science and evidence-based decision-making, I appreciate the excellent work of this committee. And I was very much in favor of the creation of this committee in the last session. Today, as you asked, I'm here to address two topics of interest to the committee. First of all, scientific research and publication in French, an issue that I'm very interested in as someone who came through the French education system. And secondly, the ambitious international research programs. As a government, as you know, we've worked hard, very hard, to support a strong science and research base in Canada, to ensure and focus on our competitiveness and prosperity. All initiatives are based on the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Just as diversity is a major strength of Canadian research, I think we all agree to that, our linguistic duality also sets us apart and adds to the diversity of ideas, connections, and collaborations Canada has on the world stage. Our country is bilingual. This is an essential, of essential importance in the 21st century. Linguistic duality makes us a destination of choice for French language researchers across the country, and that's why we fund research and training in either official language and encourage French language scholarships, because we know that this is very important and vital. We have, for example, initiatives and associated for the publishing of scholarly articles in French. Many of these publications are supported by grants. They're in French and support the publication of French-speaking scholars. We also have the Science Communication Skills Grant, which supports organizations that provide STEM communication training in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to students and faculty. In addition, NSERC has two annual science promotion campaigns, Science Odyssey and with the Science Literacy Week, which both actively involve Francophones and promote French language content. Mr. Chair, I'm always listening for new ideas and international best practices in order to ensure greater equity in terms of funding and dissemination of research in French. You have my word. We will continue to do our best in this regard.
Committee, Moonshot Research. You kind of know me by now. I've been ambitious, and I want Canada to have the same level of ambition. Mr. Chair, it is vital that we focus our attention not only on the immediate matters we are facing as a nation, but also on the long-term challenges and opportunity that we face as a society, and I would say indeed globally. And I want Canada to lead. That's always where I put us when it comes to science, technology, innovation. Never before in our lifetimes has the importance of science-led decision-making has been so starkly apparent than during the COVID-19 pandemic. I would say, in a way, Canadians have reconnected with science. Certainly, we all owe a debt of gratitude to the exceptional scientists across Canada, and I would say indeed the world, who have worked tirelessly to help us combat the virus. Pour assurer que nous sommes encore mieux préparés aux futurs.
To ensure that we're even better prepared for future health emergencies, the Government of Canada is making critical strategic investments in leading-edge life sciences and biotechnology research.
That we have Moderna now, which has invested significantly in our country. When I started as minister, our fill and finish capacity on vaccines was around 30 million doses. I think today it's fair to say we're above 600 million doses. Mais aussi, Monsieur le Président, nous devons nous assurer que
Mr. Chair, we also need to ensure that we can accelerate development and commercialization of Canada's world-class research on vaccines and therapies, and that we have the talent to build a stronger biomanufacturing ecosystem.
Biomanufacturing and life science strategy to ensure that Canada has the skills, the experience and expertise to develop vaccines and indeed therapeutics as a global leader in the life science field. The strategy is already showing success. To our nearly $2 billion investment, we're seeing global vaccine producers coming to Canada, and I agree, Mr. Chair, that I'm coming to the end. But vaccines are just one. The government is generating big and bold ideas. You've seen whether it's quantum AI and cyber security, which I think are going to be key to underpin the growth in our national economy. Mr. Chair, I would have more to say, but I see you are impatient and colleagues are impatient to ask me questions. I'm very pleased to be here. Je vous remercie, mesdames et messieurs, de m'avoir invité aujourd'hui, et je vous cède la parole.
Thank you very much for inviting me today.
Minute over, so we'll go to 1:07 today, back on the clock. So MP Bouchard, no worries that you'll get your rounds in. So with that, we'll move on to the 6-minute round with MP Soroka kicking it off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming today. I'll be talking more about the moonshot programs, and I'm quite impressed that we're going to go down that road. I'll start off with an easy one, and just remember to keep your answers as short as my questions then, please. Do you think funding in Canada for researchers and universities is acceptable?
I think that I would say, dear colleague first, I think we can always do better. I am happy that you're asking on the moonshot, because I think that whether you talk about the Lunar Gateway or the Artemis mission or, for example, the James Webb Telescope, I think we're punching above our weight, and we need to continue to show excellence, and we need to put the funding behind, because obviously you need to look at that on a comparative basis, what our G7 partners are doing. We have been doing a lot, I would say, and I'm coming to the end. We've invested, 14 billion since 2016, but if your question, can we do more? Certainly, and are we looking at that? Definitely.
Okay. The other day in the Globe and Mail, Stephen Chase had an article that our top universities are collaborating with vital research projects with the Chinese military scientists at the National University of Defense Technology, known as NUDT. The NUDT reports to Chinese Communist Party's Central Military Commission. One collaboration was on quantum cryptology, on how laser interruptions can aid in eavesdropping. Don't you think this kind of research poses a risk to Canada's national security?
I would say I'm glad that you're asking the question. I wish the journalists would have asked me the question. I would say very openly to all Canadians, first of all, this is concerning. It is unacceptable. And secondly, I expect, and I've made my voice very clear to university, that I expect them to do more when it comes to sensitive research and IP. We have already adopted guidelines on research security. We'll have the Security Research Center to help them. And I can tell you today, as a piece of news, that I'm looking to impose additional requirements when it comes to strengthening research security in Canada, because to your point, we need to be eyes wide open, and we need to ensure that sensitive research and our IP is adequately protected. And when it comes to national security, I think you know me by now, there's no compromise. So there'll be new guidelines being issued very shortly.
Okay, and also in that article, the NUDT was blacklisted by the United States in 2015 because Washington believes it involves or possesses significant risk. This is the same year this Liberal government was elected, and for 8 years you haven't blacklisted the NUDT, like the U.S. For 8 years, this Liberal government hasn't done anything about national security against the NUDT. Why not?
I would say, with the utmost respect to a colleague, which I admire in this House of Commons, you've heard me before. I'm not going to take lessons from the Conservatives when it comes to national security or science, sir, with respect. I am the minister. You're looking at the minister who imposed the strictest conditions on research security. And I will continue to do so, because as a former Foreign Affairs Minister, I don't think there's many people who understand better what we need to do to protect our research and our IP, and I'm very committed. But I would think when it comes to national security, sir, it's not about a Liberal or whatever. It's about us as parliamentarians doing what's right for Canada.
That really didn't answer my question, though, because you talked a lot about how we should be doing more and we're going to be doing more, but nothing's really seemed to be being done. Why not?
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
MP Housen?
Monsieur le Président, ça fait assez longtemps qu'on a...
We've been waiting for the minister for a long time to appear before us. We worked hard with Mr. Blanchet-Joncan to get two very important motions before this committee for discussion: French language production and the moonshot programs. And now the questions are being focused on national security and not on the subject that we're here to study today. Could we at least discuss the subjects that we have on the agenda for today?
Line of questioning in order, because we are talking science and we're talking moonshot and the importance of why would a country do a large scientific investment without protecting it. I would rule the line of questioning in order, and I'll pass the floor back to Soroka for 2 minutes and 50 seconds.
Okay, thank you for that. Minister, then I'll go on to a different question then.
You want me to answer that question, sir?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I would take perhaps objection to that, because if you look in the budget 2022, we invested $159.6 million for the implementation of the National Security Guidelines for Research Partnerships. So not only we put guidelines, I would say, sir, but we've even put money to back these guidelines to help universities. And I'm having discussions with the granting councils and with the U15, which are the 15 largest universities in Canada. Sir, there's no one more committed to protecting our IP and research, and I'm sure you are the same. This is not a partisan issue. This is about protecting our country, because we want to make sure that if we want to be best in class in the G7 and in the world, we need to have proper guidelines, and we're going to help the universities to do that.
Okay, because that's one of my next questions. It seems like the universities are kind of floundering. They're not certain where the federal government stands. They don't have the money or financial means to continue doing this research, so they do look to organizations such as the NUDT to get research done. Now, why are they having to create their own policies or safety protocols in place when the federal government isn't doing that for them?
Well, I think I would say, based on my discussions, the U15 and others have been asking us to provide them the guidelines. I think what they expect from their federal government, and I'm sure you appreciate this is a shared jurisdiction with the province, and there's a lot of people in the ecosystem. But you're going to see in the next guidelines we're going to be issuing, we're going to be enjoining universities across Canada to adopt similar rules to protect sensitive research and IP, and I think this is in the best interest of Canada. And I can tell you, I am, with my officials, you have the best people here in Canada who are dealing with research and innovation, truly committed to protect our scientists, our researchers. But in order to do that, what they're asking from us, the guidelines we put in place last time, sir, were really a coordinated approach. Now, with the recent event that you mentioned, we're going to do more, because I am not happy. And it's unacceptable, and I've been saying that very clearly to them. So we'll come out with additional guidelines, and I think that's what they want. because that's why we created also the Research Security Bureau, because you know what? In reality, it's sometimes complex for them to understand that. So they need to work with our intelligence agency. We need to work with them. This is I would say, a Team Canada effort to do what's best for the country.
Thank you kindly for those answers. Now moving on to Member Lauzon from the Liberals for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Minister. Thank you. Like I am, you're a great defender of the French language. You're from Quebec. We're fortunate to have a minister from Quebec, but also from a very francophone region of Quebec. Can you tell me what government initiatives have supported and promoted research? You've got a team here with you today to represent research. But to talk about French, can you tell us, for example, what we've done to eliminate barriers? What have we done for researchers, French-speaking researchers? Well, thank you very much for the question. And as you said, I'm from Shawinigan, which and I did the bulk of my studies in French. I understand the importance of French in the study of science. And there's some good news. Now, my colleagues can answer as well, but we heard that 25% of all people on the granting council's boards are French-speaking, and many of the applications are accepted, and so the rate is higher than we might have expected in the past. The reality is that the granting councils are subjected to the Official Languages Act, and I want to ensure, Mr. Lauzon, and do ensure that we promote all initiatives. It's like I said in my opening remarks. There are various initiatives where we seek out francophones, not only in urban areas, but also in rural areas. Our programs, as you know, focus on young people because we know that they're the talent of the future. If we want to prosper in the future, we need to focus on the talented young people here. And we're looking at what's being done elsewhere as well. We're seeing that the same thing is happening in Germany, Italy. We're looking at the language of publication, and English is taking over a large portion of that. This is happening in other countries as well, in other G7 countries. So we need to put in place additional steps to deal with that. And it's a concern for us because when we talk about diversity, we have linguistic diversity, and the research councils, even if they are at these councils, they understand the importance of French and French programming, the importance of translating French documents and documents into French. And this is something that not only covered by policies, but we also have funding. And we can ask Mr. Stewart to tell us what they've been doing at the National Research Council of Canada. Well, I'd like to come back to that if we have some time at the end. But I'd like to take a few minutes also to talk about what you did last January by launching the National Quantic Strategy with $370 million in investments as part of that study. Dr. MacDonald, who was a Nobel Prize winner, talked about the importance of Canada's role in quantic research. We had a lot of questions on that. Do you think that this strategy is something that would be a moonshot project? Absolutely. And I can tell you that when I talk to my colleagues in the Department of Commerce in the United States, they realize that Canada has a lead when it comes to quantics, when we talk about cybersecurity, AI. And this is important because all of our other strategies for aerospace, for example, for other areas in batteries, biopharmaceuticals, and I could continue with a host of other examples. But in the economy of the 21st century, that will be supported by AI, by quantics, by cybersecurity. I think that strategy is greatly appreciated in Canada, but also abroad. I'll give you an example. There are companies in Toronto. They're the only ones with a quantum computer in the world. And it focuses on chemistry and batteries. And that company in Toronto, when you talk about large auto companies across the world, they all know the company from Toronto because they say with their help, we can save 3 years with respect to research on batteries of the future. So that's the kind of project that we have. We've got Leeway in Sherbrooke. It's another important company doing important work. We're in constant discussions with our colleagues in Washington to focus on what we can do because I talked about the Albany-Bromont corridor, north-south. I want to launch an educational corridor for research and the building of semiconductors, and it's gaining traction. I think there's a lot of future there. So our position, Canada's position worldwide is very strong. We've got the cooperation of G7 countries then. We're an important country. Is that what you're saying? Well, clearly, collaboration is the way of the future with our partners. With AI, we were involved with France. When I travel abroad, colleagues realize that Canada is an important player. But there's a lot of strong competition. We need to continue to invest. That's why we set up a national strategy, precisely to work on these issues.
From the bloc, MP Blanchette.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister. Canada is currently going through a disastrous linguistic situation between 2000 and 2021. Publications in French went from 4% down to a very small percentage. Can you tell me why? What's happening? We're seeing problems with linguistics in science in Quebec. Answer, well, it is of concern. And as I said, this is something that we're seeing in Germany. We're seeing it in Italy when we go to Japan as well, because we looked at comparable data. There's a trend towards publishing everything in English. It's a global trend. And I think that we need to do more. This is exactly what I've asked our teams to do, and so that's why we focused on the councils. We've ensured that there are francophones, and 73% is our approval rating. Well, I'm very familiar with that statistic. Yes, of course, the level of projects being accepted is accurate, but what about the funding? But the amount of funding that goes to those projects is lower. At the three granting councils, it's lower, but the applications are high. So 50% of French-speaking people aren't applying in French for funding in French because there is a reduction in the value of funding provided. So I'd like to go back to a question. Since you take on your position, what have you done to focus on the vision of French in science? Well, as I said, I myself went through the Francophone academic system. I understand the importance of being able to develop and study in French. I acknowledge the work that my colleagues are doing on the various councils, and I have added my voice to yours and that of other colleagues to say that French is important. We know that internationally, we can see what's happening. We have to be vigilant, and vigilance is important. We need to be able to put forth and promote our researchers. We need to ensure that we can attract talent in French. That's why in Montreal, for example, in AI, we have a leading company. This is just an anecdote, but the chancellor from Germany came here to look at that. It shows the importance of the work that we're doing in AI. But we do have to be vigilant. If we look at these statistics, look at these numbers. Vigilance isn't producing results. So I hope that you'll be able to answer these questions. Well, if you have any suggestions, I'm open to them. Many of the witnesses who appeared before this committee have talked about the possibility of having some incentives and quotas. This exists at Telefilm, it exists in audiovisual, it exists as well at the Arts Council, in literature. there has to be representation of Francophone content. Would you be prepared to commit as a minister, as part of the government, to ensure that there is a real linguistic diversity in science and to have, like you do elsewhere, to include linguistic criteria to advance science in French? What our objective is to do better together. So if there are some suggestions, yes, if people have good ideas as to what we could do in order to improve the representation of French and to improve this, then, well, we've looked at what's happening in France and Germany. We want to have best practices here. And if there's something that you have, a suggestion, if witnesses have provided suggestions, I'm sure that you'll be producing a report, and we're going to be looking at it very carefully. What we want to do is ensure that there's good representation of Francophones on the evaluation committees, a proportion of Francophones who receive funding. But if there are better ideas that we can put in place, well, I'm open. Well, Minister, because time is flying, with respect to good ideas, you mentioned these evaluating committees at the granting councils. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that the people on these committees self-assess their linguistic qualifications. I give them the benefit of the doubt, but it's not because they've done one class in grade 12 or spent a few hours that they can say that they are in a position to be able to analyze a submission in French, a scientific submission. So I'd also want to drive you direct you towards a good idea. And there have been a number of good suggestions. And Quebec supports these ideas with respect to the developing French outside Quebec. Where's the federal government involved there? There doesn't seem to be much involvement. And there have been no answers to this question. Well, I would be happy to talk with Rémi Quérion. He is an excellent partner. We draw a lot of inspiration from what's being done in Quebec because they have a lot of good ideas, and especially when it comes to science. We work hand in hand, and I'm happy that he's here. We work hand in hand with Rémi. He's been on a number of committees that we have put together. If there are some good ideas that we can put in place to help, well, that's why we came today, and that's why I brought everyone with me this morning. It's good for me to hear you, but it's also good for my colleagues around the table to hear from you, to hear these ideas. And, well, to follow up on the situation with respect to French in science, what about a permanent committee in the granting councils that would be representative of civil society? Well, I received some analysis from Mr. Bouchard on how we can do better in science. This report will be tabled shortly. I will talk about it with the committee. There will be a number of recommendations. And if you have a recommendation to make as well, I will be prepared to listen to it.
Unfortunately, MP Bouchard. Now moving on to the NDP, MP Cannings for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. At our last meeting about moonshots, one of our last witnesses on that program, on that idea, was Dr. Alexandre Blais from University of Sherbrooke, talking about quantum physics. And one of the points he really emphasized during his talk about how we should do moonshots was before we could even think about it, we have to support our young scientists. And you mentioned supporting young scientists yourself in your opening remarks. And yet, while we are putting big money into big ideas, we seem to have left our young scientists completely behind in Canada. You know, you've got members from the tri-councils here. They provide valuable scholarships that keep these young people alive, basically, while they're doing their master's thesis, their PhD, their postdoctorate fellowships. And yet, certainly for the graduate scholarships, those funding levels haven't changed in 20 years. And these people are living in poverty. When the Ontario Science Policy Network did a survey in 2021 that found that 45% of respondents don't have enough to get by. They struggle financially every month. 87% reported stress and anxiety about their finances, and more than half are living with no savings at all. It found that 32% of graduate students considered dropping out of their program due to financial concern. And yet, and we've been telling the government this for a year now, it seems. I was hoping to see something in the fall economic statement about it. I'm praying that there's something in the budget coming up that will address this problem in a serious way. These people, I think, are 48% behind where they should have been had we kept up with inflation. So I guess what I'm saying is, can we make this our first moonshot, is to make sure that our young scientists don't have to live in poverty and worry about that, and instead get on with their lives and do the good work that they need to do. We're losing 38% of our PhDs every year overseas because conditions are better in every country except Canada. So I'm just imploring you to fix this and make it our first big moonshot.
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you, MP Canning, because you've been a big voice, and I think we meet some of the same people. And thank you for bringing the human dimension to all that, because it's all about people at the end of the day, and I'm grateful for the work you're doing. I say that as a colleague, which esteem you very much in what you're doing. I am as preoccupied as you are in terms of the relative numbers that we've seen and where we need to be and where we are. Trust me that I'm always raising my voice to do more for our students, for our graduates. It's certainly something we're looking at. You're quite right. We have done record investments since 2016 of $14 billion, but we need to also measure the relative performance in terms of these grants to the students. So I'm very well aware of the statistics. I can assure you that's something I take very seriously, because I think Canada's success in the future depends on talent. And talent is the young people you talk about. And we've met the same people. I think we were together in some of these fora together. So I'm very sensitive to that. As you appreciate, I don't have the last say in all of that. But certainly it's something which is very top of mind. And I want to thank all the young PhD students, researchers, graduates who are coming to Canada. We're still a big magnet for talent. I can tell you, if we've been able to attract the likes of the Stellantis in Canada, BASF, GM, POSCO, they realize the five things I say, the first thing is always about talent. So we are a magnet for talent. We need to continue to be, and I'm grateful for your help in making sure we achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I just would add that whenever we lose young people to other countries, that's a loss. We have trained them, spent big money, and some of the people have pointed out that we're losing in the order of $640 million a year in lost training talent, because we have spent that money training someone who then goes to the United States, the UK, Germany, wherever, to carry on that work and work on those countries' big scientific challenges, their moonshots. So that's my one aspect. I will perhaps get back to other things, but that's the one point I wanted to make in this round is, please, let's support our young scientists before we go off spending. And I'm all for moonshots, but let's do this right before we go on to other things.
MP Canada gets top of mind for me as well, and I'm grateful that you're with me on that, okay. and that we think about the human dimension of science, and I think it's very important. I think everyone here would agree. I think we're in violent agreement on this one, okay. That we want to do more, we need to do more, and that we are grateful for these young scientists, and certainly we're looking into that.
Okay, I will watch the budget carefully.
Thank you, MP Cannings, for being so on top of your time. Moving on to MP Mazur for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Minister, for coming out this morning. I guess this afternoon now. Minister, during the study, we've heard from experts on how nuclear energy is important for Canada's economy and environment. You mentioned you want Canada to lead. Do you want Canada to lead when it comes to nuclear energy?
Definitely. I can say, no, but if you want me to expand, but definitely, I've been talking to, we've done a number of things on the SMR fields. I think Canada also as you would know as a colleague, with the can-do, and my previous business background, I'm very familiar with that technology, that is in South Korea and many places of the world. I think that's something that we should be able to promote and that we should be behind. And I think SMRs provide a small modular reactor is a great way, for example, to help communities develop resources in more remote locations. I've been talking to a number of Canadian companies, and I think there's a number, we've been financing some of these projects across the nation, and certainly I am very optimistic as to what we can achieve together.
Okay, good. Are you aware that your government excluded nuclear power from the Green Bond framework?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that, and I think the answer to that for Canadians, it is not Canada's to put the definition. As you know, in international finance, these are definitions which are agreed globally or internationally. So you can call yourself whatever you are, but to qualify for the green bond under the markets, it has to have certain criteria. That's my understanding why that was not included. But on the other end, are we supportive? Are we putting money behind nuclear? Definitely.
Are you aware that your government's current environment minister tweeted, and I quote, "Japan says sayonara to nuclear energy. Can't wait for us to do the same," end quote.
Well, I would say I was in Japan recently, and we've been discussing. I was 3 times in Japan in the last 6 months to work with our allies. I can tell you in the minds of leaders around the world, it's food security, energy security, supply chain resiliency. And I think our Japanese colleagues are looking at what we can do more together. And I've been meeting CEOs of a number of Japanese companies who want to do more with us.
So are you aware of that tweet?
I would say with respect, sir, I have pretty busy days, so I don't spend a lot of time on Twitter these days.
So you are aware that he did tweet that. And are you aware that General Fusion, the only fusion energy company in Canada, is choosing to build $400 million energy plant in the United Kingdom?
I'm more than aware because I was part of the discussion with the CEO, which I have in my speed dial, which we talk on a regular basis. The reason behind that, sir, if you want, is that I think in fusion, we have a leading edge. And I think if we want to win, we have to go fast and we have to go at scale. The best way to do that is with allies. And I can tell you, just to say between us, sir, I was with the UK Secretary yesterday to talk about what Canada and the UK can do more to promote that great technology, because there's not really competition between us. That's not where the competition is. But if we team up, we can go faster.
Don't you think that if your government's environment minister supported nuclear energy, these investments wouldn't be leaving our country?
I mean, I'll tell you from my perspective, sir, I see more CEOs calling me to invest in Canada than ever before. So that's not my perception of the market. The CEO of Westinghouse called me. I can tell you I was with Terrestrial, which is another CEO that I met recently. All these people know me. We talk regularly. That's not my feeling.
So you don't think his statements have any impact on what's coming into?
I'm telling you what I hear from CEOs, and they're very keen to partner. I was with them as SMRs. We did that, as you know, in New Brunswick. We did that with the CEO of Westinghouse. I talked to all of them, and they seem to be pretty keen on investing in Canada.
Okay. We've had multiple witnesses talk about connectivity and the importance of moonshots and gathering data and stuff like that. And the Liberals promised to lower cell phone bills by 25%, and you claim that this government has achieved this. Do you actually believe this?
Well, I mean, it's Stats Canada, sir. I believe what Stats Canada published.
It says Government of Canada right here.
Well, it's data from Stats Canada, but yeah, I do believe in what Stats Canada published.
Do you believe that the cell phone bills have reduced by 25%?
Well, I'll tell you 2 things. I believe that Stats Canada data, and I also believe that we need to do more. You know me by now. I've been after these guys quite a number of times. We need more affordability, more competition, more innovation, and every decision I've been taking since that minister has been pushing them and holding their feet to fires to provide better rates for Canadians.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Now moving on to the Liberals, MP Bradford. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Minister Champagne, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be joining our committee today. I know you're extremely busy. And also to all the other witnesses that are here with you today. It's very important. Getting back to the area of talent, We know how important it is to have equity, diversity, and inclusion at our post-secondary institutions and representation of life experience in the research being produced. Can you tell the committee about the measures your department and the government's taking to ensure that diversity is a key driver in Canadian research? For example, gender diversity, ethnic diversity.
Oh, totally, and I'm very grateful for a colleague like yours to ask that question, because equity, diversity, and inclusion is part of everything we do. In a sense, the Tri-Agency Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Action Plan. Not only we talk about it, but colleagues around this table, like you said, which are esteemed colleagues, which do amazing work, have an action plan in place to make sure that we have more diversity. We know that diversity leads to excellence. And it's not just me saying that, but if you look at data around the world, and I think having more women, more young women, we've been trying to do that in STEM, to have a number of initiatives to bring more women in STEM. We've also been funding Black researchers, as you say, as we've put forward. So we're always looking for doing better, and I think this is something which is key to all of us. So. And I think that colleagues around the table could tell you of their specific initiatives, but we do have an action plan because this is core. And this is not just the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do if we want to succeed. And I think everyone recognizes that when you bring more people of diverse background, you get better outcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Also, Canada has made a lot of progress in the last few years advancing research and science in Canada. Can you walk the committee through some of the highlights and accomplishments from our government in science and research from the last few years?
Well, I would say one of my most proud, when I started as minister, I think I alluded to that when I did my first comments. Our capacity in biomanufacturing was one thing. And thanks to the good work of Jens Stewart, which is here, we have now a biomanufacturing facility. We wanted having private and public facilities. We have the like of Moderna. We had Sanofi came. And for me, when I had that role, there was nothing more important in protecting the health and safety of Canadians. Like I said, we didn't choose that pandemic. We don't know what may come next, but we chose to be better prepared. And I think this is probably a legacy for a generation. We invested about $2 billion to be more resilient. And I think this is something significant. I can think also of the Artemis mission in space. Canada is going to be the second nation in the world to have someone which is going to go around the moon. That's a big thing that we should all be proud. I was talking to Marc Garneau, and I said, I want the next astronaut to go to inspire the generation. I said, Marc, you inspired me when I was young. I want the next astronaut we have to inspire the next generation, say, we're going to go to the moon, and, the plan is to go beyond to Mars. And Canada is at the center of that mission with NASA. This is amazing what we've been achieved. The James Webb Telescope, we're part of that initiative. We've been doing great things, and I think the world is looking at us to partner with that, and I'm very proud. Obviously, we can always do more. We're looking at that. We've done a great thing on genomics. We are doing great things on quantum, like I said, and artificial intelligence. But what I want is to have world-class moonshot project that the world would recognize. We're negotiating our Horizon Europe with the EU Commission. I just hosted the EU Commissioner last few days. We talked about that because we're going to be part of the largest research project probably in the world, at least in Europe. So this is where Canada belongs. We belong at the head table. And that's my vision, is always to lead, to have the best, and certainly to push on talent.
Yes, I believe Canada's always punched above its weight in the area, certainly of aerospace. Like when the Everero got canceled, a lot of our aerospace engineers wound up in NASA. And that was the great tragedy because it set us back for generations. But as they say, let no crisis go to waste. So I agree with you. COVID, the biomanufacturing is key. And a lot of us were upset that Connaught Laboratories had been sold off and privatized, and we didn't have that capability. So I'm glad we're on that. One more thing. We have been successful at creating funding programs that link researchers, post-secondary institutions, and industry together to drive innovation and breakthroughs in research to solve some of the most pressing challenges. And certainly with Moonshot, that would be very important. Can you talk to the committee more about how the government's vision is for creating these partnerships and strong roots in communities across the country?
Certainly.
I'm sorry we're out of time, but I'm sure Minister Champagne would be okay with a written submission.
Yeah. I would just say my tax, Mr. Chair, is kind of the answer where we bring a lot of young people into internship.
Now moving on to our 2.5-minute round, where I'll have MP Blanchette.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le ministre, vous avez mentionné tout à l'heure que...
Thank you. Minister, you talked about the publications in Germany and France in English, but the difference, there's a difference between their situation and ours. Here, we're not using a foreign language. It's another national language. And the effect is one of assimilation. This is what we've noted. We're seeing a decline of French in Canada. So from your perspective, do you fully understand the gravity of this situation? I understand it. I live in Quebec. If you talk about someone who's aware of it, I am. We also looked at best practices across the world, and what I would say to all people watching us here today, it's not a Canadian phenomenon. It's happening worldwide. But the difference is it's affecting an official language of this country. But when we look at everything being published in English in Germany, well, we look at what we can do. I'm open to ideas to counter this. Well, I'd like to add on because I know that I'd like to go back to this issue of real bilingualism and comprehension of French among the evaluators on the councils, as the Quebec government has been calling for. The criteria, linguistic incentives for research chairs, because there is underrepresentation at present. There are certain groups, but there are no linguistic criteria that are associated or attached to that for research chairs in this country. Let's create a committee to follow up on the linguistic aspect there. In 2016, the department created an advisory committee that led to the Miller Report, which examined support for fundamental science or core science. We could do the same thing here. Well, let's tell Frédéric Bouchard. Yes, he was the head of the advisory committee. I met with him the day before yesterday. He's president of the National Committee. He's a francophone. He's from Montreal. And we talked about the issue of language. So I'm very much aware of those issues. Well, I'd like to take advantage of your presence here to ask two questions. Perhaps you could provide your answers in writing. Applications over the past 20 years supported by the Granting Council. Secondly, the amounts given to each Quebec universities. Well, if that information exists, we'll find it and get it to you.
That in a written submission to his question. Now going on to
le temps d'écrire parce que vous
the
parliez
MP for MP Cannings for 2.5 minutes.
temps d'écrire.
I don't know if they even had time to write that down. He was going so fast.
He spoke so fast, on a essayé de prendre des notes.
Well, we were trying to write it down, but I don't know if we even got it.
Have it on tape, don't worry. Cannings, your 2.5 minutes is starting now.
Thank you. Well, Minister, I'd like to turn back to moonshots, and I keep hearing on the radio, reading in newspapers and magazines that the moonshot of our time is the fight against climate change. We can talk about AI and quantum and hydrogen and all those things, but what we really have to put our efforts into, and not just redouble, but make 10 times, really increase our ambition and efforts. One of our witnesses here on the moonshot study was Seth Klein, who's, you may have heard of his work. He's written a book called A Good War, comparing what Canada did in the Second World War to what we need to do for climate action, showing what we can do if we put our minds to it. And we found out some of that during the COVID pandemic. But he outlined all the ways that Canada had tackled the real difficulties during the Second World War and did amazing things and put down ways that we should and could do to tackle climate change here in Canada. And I just wondered if you, as kind of the Minister of Everything, you know, have you discussed this with your colleagues? Have you considered what we should be doing? Because we really have to do a very great amount more than we are doing on climate change.
MP Canning, I agree with you again. I wish that I would have read his book, but I look forward to have a copy and to read a copy. He's probably listening today. So I'll buy a copy and then I can read it. But to your point, I would just say investment in AI is helping climate change. Because with AI, we can better, for example, do the modeling of climate change. And I think about quantum. And I'm just giving you an example where I think these technology are cross-sector. With quantum, for example, we say we can develop better materials. And we can save time in developing these materials. And in a way, you're helping the planet because if we have a more sustainable economy, I think it's helping everyone. So I would say I agree with you totally. That's the direction I've been giving, is say the biggest moonshot project we have is climate change. But there is a lot of definition around that where even when you invest in AI, you're indirectly investing. The Space Agency, when we were in this, the investment we made on monitoring the ozone project we had, this is helping that. RadarSat from the Space Agency is helping with climate change. So I would say climate change is across a different thing. And I think these investments are really helping in that sense. And I agree with you that I'm always mindful that this is the biggest challenge we have, and we always have that in our mind as we look at these investments.
I would just quickly say that, without putting words in Seth Klein's mouth, I think what he would say is we need a CD Howe here to bring all this together. Yeah, we're doing this AI, and everything kind of feeds into it, but we need some very coordinated action on the part of government.
Thank you kindly.
I'm doing
MP
my best. That's what I
Cannings.
can say to him.
We are over
Trust
time
me.
already by 47 seconds. So moving on to MP Lobb for 5 minutes.
Sir.
First question is in regards to the National University of Defense Technology. And I'm just wondering, have you been able to ascertain how many graduate students have studied in Canada, Canadian universities?
Like I said, I find the recent articles and the facts that were brought forward unacceptable, and I am concerned, and that's why I said the university needs to do more. We published security guidelines recently, and we put even money behind that. But I think in the next, in shortly, you'll see additional guidelines to really get to the bottom of that.
Okay, so it's probably fair to say we're unsure how many potential research students are operating now or have in the past. The other thing I was going to ask you about was, it goes back a couple years ago, and I'm sure you're familiar with this term, but it's the 7 Sons of National Defense. And these are universities located in China that have ties back to the Chinese military technology area. They're banned in the United States. I'm sure you and Mike Pompeo talked about that at your time. So are there research students from the 7 Sons of Defense currently doing research in Canada at Canadian universities?
I'm not familiar with the thing you were referring to that or the term, but what I can say is that we are actively looking at putting additional guidelines. As you appreciate, my jurisdiction is through the councils. But we're looking at something that would capture more university because that's a shared jurisdiction with the province, and universities get also private funding. In the working group we have between Ottawa and universities, what they've been asking us, and like I said, when it comes to national security, we work together, is to provide guidelines.
Does anybody keep a database of these university students that are studying in Canada?
I certainly am not familiar if there's a database of that sort, but what I can tell you is that we are working with the universities now on new guidelines because, like you, I'm as concerned as you, sir. I look at these things. I'm a former foreign minister. I understand these things back and forth. That's why when we saw that, I said the first time it's unacceptable. We're looking at best practices. The guidelines we issued were first in Canada, I would say, to have very strict guidelines. But now what we want to capture, if you allow me, just so for Canadians who are watching, we want to capture also universities that would not be through the granting councils. So we want to issue things that we hope all universities would be adopting as best practices to make sure that we protect sensitive research and IP in Canada.
Okay. Anybody up here at the panel here today familiar with the 7 Sons of Defense, and are they studying
Point of
at
order.
Canadian universities? Anybody
Mr.
up
Chair,
there?
I really feel,
MP
given that we
Bradford?
have such limited time left, it would be nice if we could keep moonshots and French research.
Well, all due respect, Mr. Chair, Ms. Bradford did bring up the Avro Arrow, so I mean, the relevance could be questioned there as well.
I think both, there's a latitude of committee to allow people to ask questions and mention subjects that are close to, and I think the example is astute one of bringing up a canceled air defense program is similar to this. So I will let, and it's Mr. Lobb's time, so he will have 2 minutes and 20 seconds to complete it.
MP Lobb,
anybody
I think in all fairness, if you want, you should have the security agencies come here to answer that question. I think it's fair to ask a civil servant who are
It's a good point,
heading.
but if you read different articles, this is just what occurs, passing the buck around.
Oh, I think that, sir, look at the guy in front of you. Who's issuing the security guidelines? I issue the security guidelines. I'm not passing the buck to anyone. What I told you is that it's unacceptable. Since this article, we have taken action. We're going to publish new guidelines. We're expanding beyond what the people you see here because I want to capture other universities so that we become best in class. I don't think passing the buck is really the way we're doing. We're addressing that, but obviously, to your specific question, I want to be responsive. I'm a parliamentarian.
But I did ask
just as
you said we should bring in some security.
Well, you should have the security agencies, folks, and I think they would be better
Point of order.
suited to answer
Fair
that
enough.
question,
But
sir.
the other question would go back to actually know the students that are studying here, to know which universities
Yeah.
and which research students, and we don't have a list. We don't have any knowledge. None of the folks here around the table, doesn't matter if it's government or public servants, nobody
Point of
apparently
order.
has the answer today.
MP Bradford? Point of order?
I question this line of questioning is inappropriate, off topic. Getting back to the Avro Arrow, I was making a comment. It was not a question, and it was to do with talent, but moonshots. That's why I raised it.
MP Bradford, we have 30 seconds left to Lob to conclude his questions.
Okay. Question for the minister. How much of your department is currently operating on the cloud? Do you have an idea? Is it all converted to the cloud? What is your
Listen,
goals as minister? Do you
I'd
see
be
the
happy to
benefits of
bring
that?
our chief technology officer next time to testify, sir. I would not start guessing how much is in the cloud.
Does
but
he report that to you?
But I'm happy.
As the Minister of Industry, does he report that to you in your own department?
Just put it this way, sir. I'm happy that we provide a written answer to you, sir, because I want to be accurate, and with respect to your role as a parliamentarian, I want to be accurate, and I want to be responsive. So if you allow us, we'll respond in writing to your question.
Thank you kindly. We are out of time, Mr. Lob. Now on to MP Collins for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and
Sir.
welcome, Minister. And I'll try to get us back on the moonshot questioning. And that's why you're here. Last week you were in Hamilton, in my municipality, with the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and you had the opportunity to tour McMaster University's Innovation Park. And with Dr. Amati was there, Professor Amati highlighting their work on autonomous vehicles, as well as other AI-related work that they're doing there at McMaster. And one of the themes that had come up during the tour, not just from the professor, but from the students, is that there's a lot of private sector support. A lot of government resources have been invested into the facility, and so that building you were walking through, obviously. Lots of federal dollars and investments have been made, as well as provincial. But where they were seeking more assistance was along the lines of operational dollars. And so the automotive industries in that instance are providing funds for the students and the faculty to conduct the work that they're conducting. But their question was, what role does the federal government play on a go-forward basis from an operational perspective? So my question would be, and I know you're very familiar with the budget lines in your ministry, what role do you foresee us playing in the next couple of years, specifically maybe with McMaster, but other institutions like them who are conducting that very important research?
Well, thanks for the question. And for the folks of McMaster, I like you. I love you, actually. You do great work, and it's always a pleasure to go there. And we were well received, and everyone was kind. And in a sense, you're right. McMaster, like a number of centers, have a head start. I think that we we have everything to win in the economy of the 21st century. And certainly when you talk about autonomous vehicle, when you talk about AI, we're certainly punching above our weights. Historically, the government of Canada has been more on the capex side. With the Foundation for Innovation, that's where we've been, the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. That's why we had these programs where we invested billions, actually, to help a number of institutions across the country to really have kind of the means of our ambitions to upgrade the labs, the facilities, and all that. I am very familiar that when it comes to the OPEX side of things, university said, can you help us there? And certainly we're going to be looking at that. The other way we can look at that is also partnership. And you mentioned like the automotive sector, because I think one thing I'm trying to look, and I'm very grateful of the work of Professor Bouchard, who was part of this science review panel, to try to look what they do in the United States, with partnership, with industry, to try to bring more money to the table. That it's not just taxpayers' money or government, but that is there a way, like you see in the United States with some big corporation where they have this tech park where they can partner? I think I see that in action. I think in the electric vehicle, my discussion with the automakers, they're willing to be part of the solution. They understand that talent is going to be key for their success as much as our success, and they want to be part of that. But that's a model, and I would say the work of Professor Bouchard is going to be informative in trying to find the right balance between that, because obviously if you finance OPEX, there's a bit less money for CAPEX. So you need to be having this kind of approach. But what I'm trying to look, and I'm sure it's going to appeal to my colleagues as well on the other side, is how can the private sector play a role in that? So that's just not public funds, but something that we can do, and I think it's everyone's best interest.
Thanks, Minister. And I know you had the opportunity to speak to the President Farrar about their Global Nexus project that they're working on, which is going to prepare us for the next pandemic. And of course, McMaster was part of all things related to the pandemic we're dealing with today. They were part of a moonshot program 20, 30 years ago that helped us with the vaccine and everything related to the R&D that went into helping our country and others across the world deal with the pandemic from a vaccine perspective. And so their Global Nexus project is that next phase in helping us prepare for the next pandemic when it comes. And so I would just ask for you in terms of, where do we foresee your ministry going as it relates to key investments in pandemic preparedness and emergency preparedness as it relates to moonshot programs in that area and R&D associated with the same?
I would say they did a very great job, because they even showed me the plot where the building would be built. They brought me to the window and they say, just imagine this building there that would serve the future of resiliency. Listen, we are on the same page. Resiliency in the biomanufacturing sector is key. Like I said, the foremost responsibility we have as parliamentarians is the health and safety of Canadians. That's why from the beginning, we invested $2 billion to really invest in the whole family of vaccines, because at the time you did not know precisely what would work. And again, we're going to be continuing to invest. That project is very interesting. There's also a number of projects in the West on the World Health that we've been doing some work with Video Intervac.
I'm sorry, Minister, we're going to have to cut this off. We are
they would like me to
running
continue
long,
to talk.
I know, but we are very grateful of the analysts and the clerks, and most importantly, the translators that stayed a little bit extra today to make sure we got all the rounds of questions, and I appreciate the work that you do. Our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, February the 7th, and Madam Chair will have the clerk publish the notice soon. Well, the Madam Chair needs to sign off on scheduling that. I'm just the Vice Chair. So with that, colleagues, is there agreement to adjourn the meeting? Seeing so, we are adjourned.